Hello. So, just when I was, just after I clicked the live button, and I'm like, all right, I get a text message across my screen. Someone saw Lovecraft's episode 7, I Am episode. And if you are a woman of color, a BIPOC woman, a black woman, baby. That episode has given so many black women life. Like, I am Hippolyta, child. I am Hippolyta. Like, ooh, let me come back to you. Welcome to another caring conversation. I am Dr. Keisha, and we had to take a bit of a break. This is actually a surprise episode. I usually record. I don't usually record. Rewind that. I don't usually record. Usually, I send out an advertisement, give you about a few days' notice. You can join me on the live stream and we can engage. But so much has happened, in the usual 2020 fashion. Everything's uncertain. Like, you can't establish a routine in 2020 to save your life. Like, the moment you do, somebody transitions and becomes an ancestor, or some devastation occurs and you just got to take a personal day. Like, so much has happened. And if you saw the last caring conversation, I look like 2020 had hit home, because I did it on, I was supposed to talk about fear of failure. And I ended up talking about social emotional health, because at that time we were dealing with Jacob Blake, the murders in Wisconsin by the terrorist. Then we lost Chadwick Boseman, and it was just one thing after another. And so I came in, like, my hair, like, if you look at that video, the way I looked tells you that I was like pushing through to serve. But since then, I've taken, I'm big on my own advice. So after that video, took a trip to Houston, spent some time with my soror. Yes, I'm a Greek. Spent some time with my soror, spent some time just enjoying life and breathing and, just really building. So I am back, but I'm getting ready to travel again. Dr. Keisha Cares is really going through a growth stage, particularly me as the brand. And so I am just learning to value the importance of breathing, because we can get so lost in the doing, so lost in the, okay, I've established this expectation and I need to meet or fulfill this thing, that we're not making sure that we're okay. And so as I created these parent adult curriculums, these little 10-minute social emotional curriculums, if you haven't seen them, just go to the Dr. Keisha Cares Facebook page or Instagram page. You'll see everything there. Hopefully in a month or so, you'll see it on the website. That is the next thing that we're building out as I continue to make these resources available. But in taking time for me, I am now able to come before you, before my next, obligation, and just make sure I get this content, because I am so full that I'm excited. And, I decided, we got good lighting. Maybe you noticed we got a little bit of a camera upgrade. We getting there. We're getting there. But today we're going to have a really engaging conversation, and sticking with social emotional health. In other videos, I talk a lot about, toxic stress and the importance of having at least one supportive relationship with a caring caregiver between an adult and child, what that means. And so for this video, I decided, I'm going to give my listeners a in-depth understanding of what stress looks like when it's healthy, when it's manageable, when it's out of control. And after I explain and give you the research behind why, social emotional development and mental health is so important, I will then give you some solutions. So I'm not just going to explain to you that, the sky is falling. I'm going to show you where you can go to avoid the damage that can come from that. So, okay, you ready? I'm ready. Let's go. Enough talkity talk. Let's see how this works out. I think I pressed the right buttons. Yes! Now, so, bear with me. I think you could still, okay. Because I went and then I mess around and embarrass myself. So we're not going to do all of that. Let's do picture in picture. Nope, you cannot see me. Okay, let me see if that helps. All right, we did this. Now let me bring in this. Where am I? Okay. Well, maybe you'll just get a voice today. Well, today we're going to talk about understanding stress and relationships. And fix this so you eventually see me. Show picture in picture. Nope. Oh, yay! There I am. Good deal. Yay! All right, now that I'm fully in the B, I'm going to pick up where I left off. So as I shared, we are different types of stress. In fact, I'll even go back a page so I can give this caring conversation the introduction it deserves. Maybe? I guess my computer's, she's like, okay, she was on break too. Come on back, computer. Well, I'll just keep going in the meantime. So today we're going to discuss understanding stress and serve and return relationships, because as I shared in the beginning, there's all this focus on mental health, but I don't think there's really a concerted effort to really talk about what that means outside of the worst case scenario, which is toxic stress. But stress is an inevitable part of 2020. Like back in 2019, we thought 2019, was a standard of we shall overcome. And then 2020 hit and we realized, woo, we still had a journey ahead of us. Okay, but let's, move forward, because now we don't need that page. Please forget to turn the sound off. At least I'm consistent in that regard. So here's the overview. We're going to talk about the different types of stress, okay? And then 3. Then we're going to jump into serve and return relationships, which, is something, the back and forth, and a child. And then finally, my favorite part, I'm going to share some read aloud tips for you to incorporate return aspects within your reading aloud. And of course, this is a great way to mitigate stress. A nice little tie-in, stress. Concepts and definitions. Understand when we're talking about stress. There are 3 types. You have positive stress, life. These are the things that are inevitable, the unavoidable, that, occur over the course of a normal person's day, greater detail. And then you have tolerable stress. If you go along, like 1 is a certain size, and then 2 is a little bigger, and then 3 is pretty big as well. Well, I did it that way so that it could also convey the level of importance and attention that you should pay to these different types of stress. So positive stress, like I said, that's a part of life. It's inevitable. Kids aren't always going to get their way. So, the stress they feel from those type of situations, that's manageable. And I'll definitely go into how we can, circumvent that. Tolerable stress gets a little bigger, because this is something that can have a harmful impact if it isn't created well, but this is also a part of life. And I'll go into greater detail. This is just, and then number 3 is when we get into toxic stress. And that's the big one. Like, that's the whole reason why a lot of researchers and scholars and mental health professionals are very concerned about the weight of 2020 on people's mental health. Because we are in a situation where life has presented toxic stress opportunities. And we have to be very aware of how we avoid it. There's certain triggers here that we can avoid. And so what we do and how we perceive the stress, how we mitigate the everything, because if left untreated, we are already in toxic stress territory, being that we're dealing with a pandemic. I believe we're in month 7? And toxic stress is supposed to be a brief thing. But when it's consistent, stress is supposed to be a brief thing. But stress becomes toxic when it becomes long-term, persistent, and continues to build. Well, that's certainly what, COVID has presented in terms of we're still dealing with a lot of aspects. Mean as a parent? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Or as a caring adult or as an educator. Dr. Keisha, please tell me more about this thing of which you speak. Oh, okay. So my little computer just decided she's going to go slow. So, all right, bear with me, but eventually the slide will change and we'll go on to the next thing. Mm-hmm. I wonder if she's doing that because, bear with me, guys. I think I'm going to do something because I don't like this constant waiting. Let me see if that does. Yep, fixed it. So here's the thing. When you get super fancy and you don't upgrade your computer, because, I'm doing this bit by bit. Apparently the computer slows down if your camera's too powerful. Did you know that? I didn't know that, but now we do. All right, so positive stress. Like I shared earlier, this is that aspect of life. For example, if you're dealing with a child and you're a parent, the child wants fish sticks, or the child wants a specific toy, or they have a sibling and the sibling has something that they want, or they snatched something from them. These are those little blow-ups that happen over the course of a child's day. Parents, you're at home right now, adults, you're seeing this firsthand. I don't really have to paint a picture of what positive stress looks like because you're presented with so many opportunities to experience this. But this is healthy. This is healthy, and it's a part of early childhood development because, they have to learn to share. They have to learn kindness. Children need to learn patience. So when these little triggers happen, there are opportunities to develop these skills. And what it does to the physical and the mental aspect, you'll see a mild elevation in hormone levels. You'll see a brief increase in the heart rate. The child may cry, the child may have a tantrum, but the immediate response of the adult who talks them through the situation, helps them calm back down, they bounce back from it. You have the incident, you have the conflict, you have the resolution with the adult and the child discussing this. The child begins to calm down, the child has a chance to be heard, or the child has attention paid to them, so it lets them know that they matter. So stress begins to, ramp down. And then next thing you know, they found something new to play with, or they found some way to make peace with the situation, or they've taken a nap, whatever the situation is. And then you bounce back and you see your child, and life keeps moving. That's positive stress. That's the normal aspect of life. But then we get into the next stage, which is tolerable stress. Now, this is a little more, okay? And I don't want to present it as a light thing. Tolerable stress is when the body's stress response is triggered to a higher degree. Now, this is important because COVID has presented us with a lot of tolerable stress opportunities. And I say opportunities simply because I'm not going to assume that everyone is dealing with this. But if it does occur, there is an opportunity to build a higher level of skill if handled correctly. All right? But it's also a part of life. Now, things that count as tolerable stress, particularly that apply in 2020, death of a loved one, the inability to see friends. You're pulled out of school. This whole idea of the routine that your child had grown accustomed to has suddenly gone away, and there's no clear resolution. I don't know when I'll be able to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know when I'll, as an adult, I don't know when I'll get to really show off all these great lipsticks that I've purchased. That face mask just won't let me be great, these type of things. But as an adult, it's not tolerable stress for me. It's more positive stress because, I figure out what to do in the meantime. But if I was a child and I was doing this from a child perspective, I am discouraged because my birthday is coming up and I can't go to the theme park or the water park or whatever big thing I'm used to doing. For children who have birthdays in March and April, you absolutely had moments where tolerable stress could have occurred if they had big things they were looking forward to, or if they suddenly didn't understand why things were changing and no one could give them an understanding of when it would get better. Now, here's the thing. If this stressful event is time limited, which means I don't sit in my feelings too long. Like, yes, if we go back to my lipstick example, I still can't go outside and show off all these great lipstick colors that I'm learning. Now, I can still, flash the highlight and flash the eyebrows and maybe impress you with my increasingly developing eyeshadow game. But maybe not. But that's a limited thing. And so I am able to buffer that disappointment as an adult by talking to my friends, laughing about it, finding other people. This isn't a misery loves company type of, scenario, but this is absolutely a situation where it's very helpful to have community so that you can lament, laugh it off, talk through the disappointments, and then problem solve together. That's still an example of having a supportive relationship with at least one caring adult. From a child's perspective, that is the ability to have an adult that either finds me, loves on me, reminds me that, gives me a different perspective of looking at this disappointment. And they help me minimize the time that I'm dealing with tolerable stress. Now, let's go into a very real example. I've been giving these lighthearted examples, but let's talk about a very real example of tolerable stress. Say your child has lost a loved one during the pandemic or due to violence. If we're dealing with anti-Blackness violence, say, I thought about Jacob Blake and his boys, but that's toxic stress. There's nothing tolerable about that situation, but I'll go into that in greater detail. But let's step away from that example and let's go into a situation where someone has passed away due to COVID, or someone has just transitioned during COVID, so they didn't get to spend as much time as this person as they might have. Say it was a grandma or a grandpa or a relative, and they don't get to really mourn them the way that the family might be used to. So the parents, everybody's feeling some sort of weight according to this. This is when we're dealing with tolerable stress because a life incident has occurred and the brain, the body, the ways in which we might usually handle it aren't available. So the stress has become larger and it's still tolerable, even though this is a more severe and long-lasting difficulty. The person who passed is not going to suddenly come back. We have to adjust to this new thing. But what does it look like in the body? It looks like a brief increase in the heart rate. It looks like a mild elevation of hormone levels when we're talking about younger children. Because again, as I shared in previous videos, the child does not have the capacity to write you a journal entry and say, these are all the things I'm dealing with, or sit you down with a cup of coffee and really go into, what's bothering them. You're going to see it in their behavior, or you're going to see it in their withdrawal from certain things they enjoy. You're going to see them, express themselves in the ways that make sense to a child who is in early childhood, which think 2 to 5, 6, maybe even 7, depending on where we are with these things. But once again, here is the antidote: that caring relationship with at least one caring and supportive adult, that ability to cry on their shoulder, that ability to be held, that ability to be loved on, those encouraging words that are spoken, those conversations where we can laugh about the great memories we shared with the loved one who passed, that ability to look at the other aspects of what's happening in this moment. It's sad. We're going to miss that person. But the perspective shift is in looking at how fortunate we were to have known that person in the first place, to celebrate the beautiful memories that we had. That's a tolerable stress, situation. And by doing it in this way, you avoid the last point. And I'm going to read this because this is critical. If the stress is time limited and buffered by relationships, like I just shared, the brain and other organs recover from what can be damaging effects. Did she say brain and organs? Yes. This is a big topic. It's normally known as ACEs score, which is adversarial childhood experiences. There is a survey of questions, and if you've had, and it goes against some pretty adversarial experiences. But depending on your score, that lets you know how susceptible you are to a negative response, right? Well, here's the thing. Tolerable stress, if not treated, if you go through all the things I explained and there isn't that caring or supportive adult to help buffer those things, then we can see, and the research is astounding in this area, we can begin to see the impact of that on your learning ability, on the way your vital organs act, on the way your body acts. And that's when you start getting into toxic stress. And I'm going to take you to that next one. I see someone has figured out that I'm doing a surprise caring conversation. So, hey, lucky person, how wise are you? Thanks for joining. Now I'm going into toxic stress. Now, this is a big one. Now, very rarely am I someone who's going to read verbatim, but this is so important that I want to make sure that you're aware of this, okay? So, toxic stress, like I shared, it's the biggest of the stress factors. So you see this big old number 3, and this, that was my attempt to be child-friendly, but still scary. It's not an attractive number. Now, toxic stress is when someone who is exposed, or a child is exposed to what was described as tolerable stress. But here's the thing, there's no caring adult there. So what starts off, because usually these things start off as small things, but what starts off as something that anyone can get over with the support of others, it grows into a massive issue when you don't have that supportive adult there. And what this looks like, this is a strong, frequent, and or prolonged adversity. Did anyone say 2020? Like, COVID-19 is ripe with toxic stress pitfalls. Like, I don't want to see toxic stress as an opportunity, because I can't sort of flip that into a positive thing like I could with tolerable stress or positive stress. There's nothing great about toxic stress. Now, there is an opportunity to build resilience, because some of us, myself included, we have been exposed to toxic stress. These are things that we have overcome if we're fortunate. If we have guidance, then we learn how to move through these things, and there are opportunities to build resilience. But if we don't, then we will see a lot of the things I share. And I'm going to read this because it's important. Now, when we talk about prolonged adversity, this can be physical or emotional abuse. This could be chronic neglect. So you are a child who isn't dealing with the caring or supportive caregiver, and all of those buffers that are there in the first two examples aren't. So now you're dealing with a situation where you get to see what happens when stress can run rampant in a developing child. If this child is not only dealing with neglect and physical and emotional abuse, but they also have a caregiver who has a mental illness, or they're addicted to substance abuse, or that child is in a neighborhood where they are exposed to violence. And right about now, it doesn't even have to be a neighborhood. You could literally just be out and walking like Jacob Blake's sons, because there were 3 in that car, and all of a sudden your father entering into his vehicle results in you watching him being shot several times. That exposure, with everything that comes to it, if that caring adult, if those caring relationships are there, you start seeing long-term implications on not only their mental health, but their physical health, their emotional health, how they process, who they grow into as an adult. This is when you start to see things that what happened to you as a child begins to impact you as an adult. And it just grows bigger and bigger as you age. These things don't dissipate. It can only get worse in some scenarios. Now, there's some great books. I think I may list this in the description. But if you ever want to go deeper into understanding toxic stress, one of my favorite books on this subject is The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. You have a psychologist who worked with children, and he gives you an accounting of several cases where children who were exposed to toxic stress eventually got the help they needed. So I do want to preface this by saying, all hope is not lost if you have experienced toxic stress. And I also want to point out that you could be an adult who is now a parent who experienced toxic stress. This does not mean that you can't be an outstanding parent. This does mean that you need to look at resources like Dr.Keisha Cares. You need to consult with what other resources may be available for you to develop a relationship with a professional. So when you're triggered, when things that rub up against your toxic stress experiences rise up, you know how to deal with this. And I am going to stop talking because I have a video on this, because this subject is so important that I wanted you to hear from one of my favorite professionals.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
Right? Now, I hope you are impressed, because I'm super pleased with myself that I have now figured out how to embed videos. Oh! But the topic is so important that I wanted to make sure that if I ever showed a video, what better way to do it, what more important topic to do it on than the subject matter of toxic stress. Because if you are an adult who was exposed to toxic stress, you have to give yourself a little bit of grace. The video highlighted that there may be issues with the way you reason, with the way you learn, with the way you manage your emotions. And if you don't know why you do certain things the way you do, or why it seems like you can't overcome certain circumstances, it may be because you're not allowing yourself to. I see my friend Tony's on the chats. I see. I'm glad you're washing your hands. You may not allow yourself to have that grace because you'll be thinking that, why am I constantly failing at something, or why am I experiencing this? But it may be because when you were a child, you were exposed to toxic stress and you didn't have the buffers you needed to come through that experience. And so as an adult, you're having to figure this out. But here's the thing, your brain is, like I say, wet concrete. And it's a lot harder. It's a lot easier to shape wet concrete when it's wet. That's the early childhood years. But when it dries and it becomes cement, it's a little harder to change that. And so now we're chiseling away at something that we could have shaped and molded if we'd have did it at a younger age. But it does not mean that change cannot occur. And one of the things I hope you saw in the video, the reading aloud. Yes, you saw an adult reading aloud with the child, which is one of the reasons why I have dedicated my career to reading aloud. And I love it so much because of its power to address issues of toxic stress. Now, I'm going to move myself out the way. Can I make myself smaller? Yes, look, I'm shrinking. Okay, now, toxic stress and all of the things we talked about, there's a lot there. And I never want to leave you with something as heavy as toxic stress and be like, all right, you got your few minutes. Let's go on to the next slide. No, there's a lot here. So if you want additional resources, of course I'm mentioned, and I'm going to start with me because it's the Dr.Keisha Cares channel. Go on my YouTube page or visit my website or schedule a consultation with me if you want to work with me one-on-one and have that direct professional in your life helping you navigate this. Or use my YouTube videos, Dr. Keisha Cares, the Caring Conversations. I talk a lot about dealing with frustration. That video may really be up your alley. And I give you a lot of tools on how to deal with that. But we have to also address the anti-Blackness aspect of toxic stress, because I've been talking about it from a family perspective, but there's a lot more here, right? So toxic stress could also result from some violence, like we talked about Jacob Blake's boys. The book that was written by Dr. Walker on Black mental health, and let me be clear, the Unapologetic Guide to Black mental health, because anti-Blackness and the weight of racism on Black psyche in particular is something that should not be taken lightly, and it's not something I'm going to gloss over or lump it in as, oh, well, everybody goes through racism. No. When we say Black Lives Matter, we also need to say Black mental health matters, because when you talk about hundreds of years, centuries of oppression and what that has done to family structure, when you go outside of slavery and you look at laws and you look at socioeconomics and redlining and all of those things and massacres and lynchings, it's a lot. And so what I love about Dr. Walker's guide, and I'm practicing what I preach, baby, this book is outstanding, is that she really goes through everything that mental health, healthy mental health looks like, how to recover from racism, and how to protect your psyche moving forward, because we don't know what this world is going to look like. And trigger warning, the first debate is happening tonight. I shot this video on Tuesday, September 29th. And I can guarantee that at some point during the debate, somebody, and I just refuse to acknowledge 46 minus 1, is going to say something that's going to be triggering, particularly to those who have experienced the lack of leadership we've been forced to deal with. And we're also probably going to hear some triggers around financial situations, because there's a lot of story and buzz around the New York Times article that purports to have, obtained copies of his taxes, and the expose that's currently out into the news media around it, whether it's seen as true or held up as fake. If you are dealing with your own financial situations, if you are unemployed and, the $600 stimulus has ended and you're, forced to figure it out on your own, and then you find out that someone in a position of power had a $750 million, allegedly $1 million tax refund, it may, rub you the wrong way. That's for the adult in you. But let's get to the kids. Sesame Workshop, which is a subsidiary of Sesame Street. If you go on the Sesame Street website, or if you just Google Sesame Workshop, they have beautiful resources. One of them specifically talks about traumatic experiences. That's where you want to go for this concept on toxic stress. But they also talk about everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it's free. It's free. So whoever sees this video, if you don't want to come forward and have someone identify you by face or have someone identify you by name, I've also shared with you 2 great resources that can allow you to get some ideas on how to move forward in an anonymous way. Okay? So now that we've talked about stress, gotta sneeze. Sorry. All right, I'm back. Now that we've talked about stress and how to deal with stress, what does it mean? How do we prevent it? Like, I understand the different types of stress. There's positive stress, there's tolerable stress, and then there's the worst stress of all, which is toxic stress. I don't want my child to get to the toxic stress level. I don't really want my child to deal with tolerable stress, even though I may not be able to control that. I know my child deals with positive stress. How can I make sure that I'm always doing the most efficient or the best methods of minimizing the impact of stress on my child's development? I'm glad you asked. This answer is much easier than the discussion on stress. Think of serve and return relationships. Every single time you encounter a stressful situation between an adult and a child, particularly in the early childhood years, you always want to remember the word serve and return relationships. What does that mean? If you see my image, you'll see I have you can't see the full ping pong table, but you get the gist. You see the ping pong paddles. You see the paddles, you see the ping pong ball, and you see the little net, right? So in your mind, imagine a ping pong table. You have, you see a child on one end, you see an adult on the other, and you see the net, okay? So just as in the game of ping pong, you got to have a ball, right? What are we going to play ping pong with? So, in your mind, there's a ball. So when you talk about the serve, think about, a child hitting the ping pong ball, and it gets across the net. And then the natural reaction is that the adult on the other side hits the ball back. Now, we're not playing to win. Like, this is not, the championship, I must defeat you type of ping pong ball. So no one's turning into Serena Williams in the course of playing this game. The idea is to keep the serve and return relationship going as long as possible. So we want to keep the ball in play. Now, in serve and return language, what does that mean? when a child is a baby, now this happens in stages, right? So when a child is a baby, a serve and turn relationship is going to start with eye contact. This little newborn baby is looking at you and they're smiling and, spitting up and just being new to the world. When that child looks at you or they coo at you, your response, you smile, they do the baby voice, oh, hey, blah, blah, blah. It gets high pitched and all sweet and tender because babies bring that out of people. That is an example of the return. So the child has served you with the eye contact and the noises, and usually most adults smile and they look back, and then so the child has served you with the eye contact and the cooing. You have returned the serve by smiling, making little noises, looking directly at the child. So you already see, that ping pong ball is moving. Now, just as you play ping pong, when the ball doesn't clear the net, it gets stopped by that net. Well, here's the equivalent of that in a serve and return relationship. Say, go back to the newborn. You have a mother who has just delivered, but she has postpartum depression. This happens. And she doesn't have that desire to hold the child initially. She may feel a revulsion about the child, like she may feel negative feelings towards the child, so that when that child serves her by looking at her, cooing, like giving her that attention, the ball hits the net because there's no return. Well, what does that do? Well, if that child doesn't have another adult somewhere in the room that can serve and return, you start to hear the term failure to thrive starts to enter the conversation, because if this is long term or this is the child's foundational understandings, what you're going to start to see the child do, they will stop looking at adults, because the message that's coming across is that I'm not returned when I look at you. So the child's going to lose interest in looking at you if this happens over time and there's no one else there. The child will start to sort of interact very differently, and they will adapt to that isolation. But if that isolation doesn't improve, you'll actually start to see that child wither, just like a plant. They call it failure to thrive. They will grow at a slower rate. Their growth may be stunted. You see a whole lot of things. It depends on the child. Like, I can't give you a specific checklist, but it starts to impact that growth and development and the way in which they communicate the longer this goes on. Now, as I shared, that's the newborn stage, right? But eventually, as children grow older, serve and return relationships look different. So, when they're babies and you're holding them and they just sleep, spit up, and do other things, the serve and return relationship, like, you can master it. The baby wants to be held, the baby needs to be changed. Like, you can basically, you can be just a master at this space in the early childhood, newborn months. But they get older and they start growing, and then serve and return becomes different. It's pointing. It's the child making a noise and you making a noise back. It's discussion. And guess what works perfectly with this? You know what it is. You know what it is. Reading aloud. Huh, what do you know? Because reading aloud provides all these great opportunities for serve and return relationships. The whole activity is one massive serve and return. I'm reading a story, they're listening. They're making a comment, they're pointing to something, I'm responding. I'm reading the story, they're turning the page, or we're turning the page. Like, there's all this room. Reading aloud is an outstanding game of serve and return ping pong, because there's all these opportunities to look for serve and return possibilities, either in how I'm reading the story or how they're responding to the story. And each time you serve and return successfully, which means you get that ball over the net, you are strengthening that child's brain development. You are strengthening that child as an individual with their physical development. And not only are you teaching them the valuable tools of literacy and reading, but you're affirming them as an individual, right? So again, the return on investment, you can't beat it. You cannot beat it. Now, this one, I'm not going to show you the video because this video is about 6 minutes and 30 seconds, somewhere in that. But if you want to know more about, how are ways that I can engage in serve and return? And this is any adult-child relationship. So parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, fly educators, whomever, this is for you. Again, I'm biased. Harvard, if you're out there, holla at your girl, because I've been an advocate for years now. Center on the Developing Child. Love their work. And one of the reasons why I cite Harvard so much is because they're really one of the foundational institutions that have really built out our understanding of serve and return, toxic stress, early childhood brain development. Because early childhood, what we know about the brain really hasn't been around that long. I think, and I'm being generous, we're probably in the 50-year mark of our understanding of children's brains and how they actually operate and how literacy actually occurs. There was one point in our understanding of children, we thought learning didn't occur until they got to kindergarten. And so there's research, like there was this belief that kids really didn't learn anything until they got into school. And woe to those babies, because who knows how much valuable learning might have been lost depending on where you were in the world. But places where, even though they didn't have the research, they still believed that children thrive, like your third world countries, Amazons, the people in the villages where a whole community is involved, those kids thrived because they were always exposed to all these things. Versus people in developed countries during that stage where they just thought, oh, it doesn't matter what you do, just leave them there. You don't need to teach them. Don't, engage in learning. It's not going to stick. All wrong. So a lot of the things we know now, we haven't known that long. And so there's plenty of room to be amazed by what children can do at these ages. Like I always say, kids are breathing genius during early childhood. Like your brain is never as supple and shapeable and just absorbent as it is in the first year of life. It's amazing, right? Because who would know that cooing child, that little babbling baby is a genius, but they are, and we got the research to prove it. And if you want to know, like, how can I leverage that effectively, check out this video. I even wrote in the title, 5 Steps to Brain Building, Serve and Return. Pop that into Google, you can do that too, but you're going to want to go to YouTube, and it's the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. It's their video. Very fascinating. And it has real life examples. So we've come to that wonderful part of our dialogue, the tips and tricks. We talked about types of stress. I've talked to you about serve and return relationships. Now I'm going to share with you, what that can actually look like in reading aloud. So let me come out of this view. Let's see. I might be able to bring back the nicer camera. Let's see. All right. Can we do it? I think we can. No, that's still the regular camera. Oh, I'm getting now. That's the word. Yay! I'm learning. All right, so now we're back in HD quality. And child, I am a shiny. Okay, so I said I was going to show you how a serve and return relationship can happen with reading aloud, with a board book. Now, I'm woke AF actually. And so my example is going to be Antiracist baby board. So if I'm thinking about what does a serve and return relationship look like at the baby stage, maybe it's a newborn. If it's a newborn, you got it made. Like all you really need to do is focus on the physical touch while you're reading with the child, letting them know that, your focus is on the pointing the pictures, responding, cardboard is going to be your friend because inevitably some part of this book is going to end up in their mouth. Comes with the territory. That's why you get cardboard books. They're sturdy and they can take the power of baby saliva. They will hang in there. They will not fall. You read the book, the serve and return is the child responding to the images. They may just make little noises. They may mimic the sounds that are coming out of your mouth. To look at them, copy them, the eye contact, did you say? No, they said some babble, but your ability to, acknowledge that and focus. So that is an example at the newborn stage, first year, or really the first few months, because once we start getting into like 10 months, 11 months, maybe even a little earlier than that, you're going to get like turning of the page of a whole early childhood, first year life book. Banana. I love this story. Why do I love this story? Because it only has one word. Banana. This story is told. There's so many opportunities to interact with the story. You have opportunities to mimic the characters, serve and return at age 1 year old, 2 years old. The word is still banana, but now we can serve and return by letting the child say banana, by letting the child do the actions. The child probably at this turn. One obvious thing I can imagine a parent asking me, you have a child that may not be very patient. And so when you're reading a story, they like flip through everything, right? Don't be afraid of that, because the serve and return opportunity in that is that the child is telling you they're very interested in this story. But patience, so we can work on that. But one way, I'm going to walk you through like how to work through that. So, all wants to do is grab the book and look through all the pages. Okay, let's explore the story. So if we're just looking through the pages, one of the first things I'm going to do, it may not be the thing, but I'm going to focus on something within the pages. So green, I'm going to look at the colors. Green, yellow, orange, red. So in approaching it this way, we're honoring the fact that the child has served to see what's in this book, visually see. Because before a child learns how to read, they learn how to look at illustrations. So we're going to read things. Excuse me. This child is saying, I want to read this from an illustration point of view. And me wanting to search my enjoy a story, but I'm just going to focus. And so each time we turn the page, I'm highlighting one of the colors that's here. And if you have a child that you know of, I want to read with an illustration, they want to find a child was consistently, wanting, then again, you can, but you can find something within each page that you point out. We don't have to rush through I can find something that I highlight. And it could just be one thing, and this, you might have an opportunity to count. We've read the book visual back through. Now, I also want to preface this by saying something important. When you are talking to children, when you are reading aloud with children, particularly toddlers, it's very and engage in something else. This is another opportunity for servants to consider letting go of control. I know you wanted to read aloud. I know you probably watched the Dr.Keisha Cares, video, and you're just like full of great ideas, and you're like, oh, we're going to try it. They may not be interested in that. They may serve something to you that says, after I have read this, If they're, toddlers, 2, 3, 4, 5, they may get up and want to do something else. That's okay. The reading aloud doesn't one way. If you can, if you're willing to be flexible, give them that space. Say we were reading like 2, 3, or 1.5, and they're still learning, then an opportunity to let them guide you to the next thing. They hand you a toy. Play. Oh, just so happens I got my handy dandy rock now. But say it was a toy. And so I would turn that into an opportunity. Like maybe it's time to engage in storytelling, oral storytelling, or we just want to play telephone. Continue to serve and return. Follow that book. And if they don't lead you back to a book, then ways you can fit in this reading when it's snack time, bath time, when you have your child occupied, you can bring back this book where you left off. You may just need to do it when you have a captive audience, okay? Now, I gave you a few early childhood examples. I want to go into older, 5, 6, 7. I love wordless picture books. And like before, chalk was my all-time favorite. But I love this picture book. Here you have English, and here you have Arabic. And here's where the book becomes profound. You ready? How awesome is so loud? Where you have a story, 2 global perspectives of a family. You have Muslim faith, and then you have another family that's showing you more of a, it's really hard to tell. I don't want to speak for their religious view, Muslim faith, because that's clear. But in this image, we just see a family waking up and starting their day. So we can say, maybe it's from a non-religious point of view. And so as the story, you see what their lives, illustrations, like you have all of this possible. And so all of the serve and return relationship building that can occur in this story is endless. Images. You have the duality of storytelling. You have the perspective of different. That's one. And I'll list these books in the descriptions as I always do. Another one I want to point out is What Do You Do? I love these books and that they've older years. We also need to think about the character we're instilling in children. And since they're now old enough, we can talk about how do we handle opportunities? What do we turn that into? Of the return that can happen at this stage can be a dialogue. We read a story. They may bring up something like children love to tell stories. So they may hear and they want to tell you about something that go with that. Allow them to serve you with another opportunity to telling. Let go of the that says, I have to go to the next page. Mark in the book and pick up where you left off at another time and allow yourself to focus on what the child is saying and engage in that serve and return relationship. About at the beginning of this conversation, stress. Ways of letting you know that they're stressed. Some children may not even feel safe enough to tell you about what it is on their shoulders until they get into the safety and the comfort of a reading aloud experience. And so when you, that child to serve you with us, end up telling you about something they're still processing, something that was a positive stress, and they want to go that serve with your attention. Let's say it's a tolerable stress situation, like one has a story and the conversation comes up and now there's an opportunity. I don't want you to waste that opportunity. You have to finish reading the story. I have to finish that what you want to do in this moment because you're a positive relationship to help that child buffer stress. You want to be that adult that research shows has the power to minimize and sometimes absolve the on a child's psyche and mental health by being there, by listening that what they're saying in this moment is so important to you. That is how you make them experience, makes them look forward to reading aloud with you again because they understand the space that you created for them. And guess what you can do when you where you were, or you don't. You may read a whole new story. I want you to be a little free with how you engage in literacy. To allow children experiences as well. And what matters is that thank you so much for spending this day. I am Dr. Chin, where we talked about understanding stress and serve and return relationships. I look forward to seeing you. If you want to have a direct conversation with me, head over to my website, Dr.Keisha Cares, and schedule. There we go. Now I can end the broadcast. All this